Yesterday in the news, we read that the airline is suspending all operations. It seems as if they are having trouble finding a funder to keep the airline afloat. Press reports indicate that our finance minister is prepared to put up some of the money, but not all of it, and even the money that has been proposed by finance is subject to conditions. What does this mean for the national airline? What to do with SAA is the big question. Tonight we have the chairperson of the SAA Pilots Association on board with us. That's Grant Back. Hello Grant, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Tom, thanks for having me on the show, and hello to all the listeners and the viewers.
It's a pleasure, Grant, and good to have you on board so that we've got a voice representing some of the employees of our national airline. Nobody wants to see jobs lost when a business is in this condition, so I'm sure we'll be exploring those questions and answers as we move through the discussion. Linden Birns is an aviation expert, and I've waited a long time to meet Linden. We're meeting virtually for the first time. Hello, Linden. Good to have you on board.
Hi, good evening, Tom. And hi to everybody who's following and on the call today. Good to be here.
Thank you, Linden. We'll get to you in just a moment. But Wayne, let me start with you and ask you for Outer's position on SAA. What needs to happen with our national airline, which is now, some using words, mothballed?
Yeah, look, Tom. I mean, the best thing that could happen is if this airline was flying and flying efficiently. SAA's got a proud history. It's been a fantastic airline for many years. And Grant will tell you and share with you, I'm sure, some of the experiences. But this is when the state can run an airline and do so profitably and serve this country well with tourism and business coming to these shores. Keeping by the way, because an airline that's based here is a good money flow into the country. You can substitute it with external airlines flying in, but the money doesn't come here. It stays in those countries where the tickets are sold, the meals are prepared, the maintenance is done, and so forth. So we need it. The best thing is if we could have this airline flying and flying profitably. But unfortunately, it is in such a state now due to just sheer political bumbling and poor management, poor leadership, political interference, and you just wonder what has to happen to pull it out of the fire. And Linden's got he's been following this very astutely for a long time as well. And so they're opposing views. We've got a great relationship with SAPA. We fought together in the trenches against Duvenage. They were partners with us in that case. And the last thing that we want to see is the loss of jobs. And we need this humanity element to play out. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at it from a taxpayer's point of view, our view is that the airline needs to be replaced with a private entity with an international license so that the funds can be here, government with a small shareholding if it really needs to have one, but government should become an enabler of competitiveness in this space and an enabler of good aviation, quality aviation, safe aviation laws and practices in this country. And SAA's days, we believe it's beyond being salvaged, but that's a view that many share, but others don't, and to hear this announcement today or yesterday, it's just this can has been kicked down the road for so long. We wonder how much longer it can be kept on ice. December last year is when it was put into business rescue. We're going to be in December in a couple of months' time. And it's just the pandemic has come, and I think it's given the country an opportunity to look at this differently. But yeah, that's our view at the moment.
Well, let's put this question that's coming in. It's been repeated by many viewers, and that is, who would invest in SAA? Peter Rosemer puts it very bluntly. He says, asks who would invest in a sinking ship? I'm going to pose the question to both Grant and Linden. Let's start with Linden. Linden, who would invest in SAA? And is it an entity that someone would invest in? What needs to change to make it attractive, if anything?
So, I think the first thing that needs to be clarified is, how do you marry up the concept of being an investor with government's view of how the role that it sees for the airline? So, an investor by definition is someone who has some money and wants to invest it in something, in a vehicle that he perceives is going to give him or her the maximum return on that investment. Government's view on SAA has been slightly different as a shareholder. In fact, quite different. They've got this notion of a development agency opening up and serving markets that would otherwise not be served. And I think there's the debate around, so first of all, how do you marry those two ideologies, those two different mandates that they would seem to be pretty much irreconcilable? And then you've got on top of that legislation and regulations that limit ownership and control over airlines, and certainly in terms of foreign investment. And then you've got to ask yourself, if you were to invest, what sort of leverage would you have over the airline, and how would you be able to determine how it's run? And I think we don't have to look terribly far outside the airline industry. Just look at what's happened at the airports company, where they have investors, private shareholders that came in, who've felt very aggrieved over the last few years about the fact that they actually have zero say in determining, what happens with that company. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is that, obviously SAA's accumulated losses of 27 billion between 2011 and 2019. And it's never been properly capitalized. In fact, as long as I've been following this industry, and I'm over the last 3 decades now, this airline has perpetually never been properly capitalized by successive government administrations. And it's always been a call, listen, we need to properly capitalize the airline, and all it ever gets is a succession of piecemeal band-aid government guaranteed loans. And all that's done is dig the debt hole, put the airline into a debt trap. And now we're in a situation where everything's accentuated with the depreciation of the rand, with the COVID crisis, before that already with our downgrading, credit rating of South Africa, and then on top of that, state capture and all the other interference that got in the way. So it's a very sorry state. And I think, just to echo what Wayne was saying, it's very easy for us to talk dispassionately and unemotively about the numbers. But there are people's jobs and livelihoods at stake, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of that. And a lot of people, signed up on the promises and the undertakings that were being made and dangled in front of them by DPE and by the rescue practitioners. And, quite honestly, government's got to do the honourable thing here. It's either got to put up or shut up.
Got it, Linden. Let me pose the question and pose it slightly differently to Grant. Grant, is SAA still a worthwhile investment? And when we talk investing, we talk shareholding. So I'd like you to comment on a proposed or your proposed shareholding structure, or what would you like to see happen if an investor steps forward and says, we feel it's attractive. Is it still attractive?
Well, firstly, I agree with a lot about what Linden has just covered, and it was great to hear, particularly about the employees and the government stepping up to the plate and either doing one thing or the other. They have basically dangled a carrot, consistently saying that the money is going to be coming, and we do have a lot of employees out there that are in a very difficult way, and we really, really would like to stress to government that now is the time to come to their aid. But to answer your question regarding the viability of SAA, I mean, right back when we started this process in business rescue in December, we were right in there, sleeves rolled up, ready to participate, do what we had to do from a labor perspective to make SAA work. Do we believe SAA can work? Absolutely. What does it need? As Wayne has said, as Linden has said, it needs the capitalization that it never ever got. I mean, I don't know how many turnaround strategies there were. They were all set up for failure because they never had the primary ingredient, which is the finance that had been committed to when the plans were accepted. So that was just set up to failure for one. One of the airlines that has always been used as a comparator to SAA because of its geographical position is Air New Zealand. And they were in a really bad position about 10 years ago. And they're one of the most successful airlines today. Why? Because they were capitalized. They got the best that they could find in the industry to come in, whether it was board level, whether it was CEO level, senior management level, etc. And they really reinvented themselves and became one of the top airlines today. They used a lot of different mechanisms that were available in the market, metal neutral joint ventures, the type of thing which they've got going with United at the moment, which was a big boost in generating revenue for the airline. So, in a nutshell, is SAA, could it work? Yes. What does it need? It needs money. What else does it need? It needs skills. What has it not had? Well, it hasn't had skills. There's been political appointments. We've had a board that's been, in my opinion, a lot of the time dictated to by DPE. The government's been constantly involved in decision-making processes. When Vianney Girona was there, he was incredibly frustrated, as he said when he resigned, and he said he can't continue anymore. And if you look at previous CEOs that were trying to do their best, it was continually, their departure was predicated on the continual intervention from the DPE and the lack of funds. We were living hand to mouth. I met Vianney Girona many times when he was there during his stint at SAA, and often we would discuss, the fact that there was this constant, queuing up for further funds. There was a trickle feeding the airline, and as Linden said, we just continually were living on debt. That ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it was costing us about 2 billion rand a year to finance. So how can an airline survive with lack of skills and the lack of the financial commitment that the shareholder was required to put in? I mean, look at the success of other airlines that have shareholder participation. I mean, Emirates is one, and there's a lot of speculation that their fuel is a lot cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. But they have full-blown support from their shareholder. We have never had that. It's always been questioned. And in fact, as you know, Peter Davies, who was one of the turnaround specialists, was going to join us on the show tonight, but unfortunately, he couldn't at the last minute. I mean, he's incredibly frustrated by seeing what's going on at SAA because he passionately believed that SAA could be turned around. And he went to government, he went to parliament and said, listen, it's not going to cost you 10 billion rand, it's going to cost you 21 billion rand. And everyone kind of just shuffled their feet and looked at the papers and no one committed to this. So what do? They just put in a little bit of money and that's destined to fail. So either it's take it on and do it properly or don't do it at all.
I worked for Vianney Girona when he was an executive at Vodacom, and when he took up the CEO position at SAA, I remember thinking he's a brave man. Grant, you represent the pilots at SAA. With the airline now, effectively the operations have been ceased, or operations have ceased. Where does this leave employees? Are people getting paid? Does anyone have any idea of what the future holds for them?
So people haven't been paid since March. That was the last time that the majority of employees got paid at SAA. Unless, of course, you were part of the team, and I say team, that was able to work on the repatriation flights, which was on the international, or if you were part of distributing food on a contract that we have at the moment up into Africa on our narrow-body 320s and 319s. If you weren't part of that operational team, then unfortunately you were going to be receiving UIF or TERS. So that has been incredibly strenuous on everybody, all employees across the board. I mean, even SAA Technical have been on, I think they're on 50% salaries, they're now on 25% salaries, and I think they down tools the other day, as you probably are aware. But since March, there have been no salaries. We just want to define something, and I haven't got this from the company, but I did read it in the press. I think Karen Smith wrote it in one of her articles, to say that there is a mothballing of operation going on now, but that all flights that have been committed to on the long-haul repatriation flights will continue. And in fact, I think there's a flight coming up this weekend. And I think that the 319s, 320s will continue on their current contract until it ceases. But there will be no more procured work for SAA. We are employees of the company. In our opinion, we believe that all employees should be paid or retrenched, or given the offer of a voluntary severance package. So what the airline has done is they've turned the tap off on everybody. They have claimed what's called supervening impossibility, which is a type of, it's a term in law in which we can tender our services, but due to the laws of the country, for example, they are unable to allow us to tender our services. So on that basis, they claim they can't pay salaries. We dispute this for June, July, up until today. As the flying has opened up around the country, we could have done we feel we could have done flying, in particular in the cargo area, which was very lucrative when the lockdown happened due to COVID. I mean, I have friends flying in the East that are Timex at the moment. They can't fly anymore for the year because they've actually flown that much over that period.
Wow.
I think the airline, had it been better run, it definitely could have got more cargo contracts and we could have got more flying.
Viewer comments coming in thick and fast. We're going to try and get as many of them on screen and to our panelists as possible. Esna Erasmus raises an issue that has been mentioned before. Cut your losses, says Esna. There are various countries without national airlines. Wayne, do we need a national airline in South Africa? Do we need the South African flag on the back of a plane, on the tail of our aircraft? If so, does that mean it has to be a national carrier? Esna's point is echoed by other comments in the comments section tonight. What's the solution?
Well, there are many countries that don't have a national carrier. So the short answer is you don't need one, but it's preferable to have one. Because as I said, and Linden will give you some breakdown of the numbers, but you could run SAA at a loss of 1 to 2 billion rand a year and still have a positive benefit in the country because of the money flow that comes into the country, the jobs and taxes and other elements that are created as a result of having the base here. So, there's that fine line. But I think, if we cannot run it properly, if we cannot run it profitably, or at least profitably enough, to make it worthwhile for the nation, then we've got to answer the question directly and be blunt about it. Not in this current state, no. But we've had it run before. We've had a successful SAA. So how do we get it there and very, very quickly? And as Grant said, there have been a number of people in and out, so many plans presented, and yet we do know one thing, that if you got the aviation experts in and they were left alone to do the job and were capitalized properly, we would have a great airline. The problem is there's this lack of trust in government. Government has not done itself any favors, and not only just in SAA, everywhere you look. And so there's this trepidation, when government comes up with a good plan, you just wonder, are they able to pull it off, and what's it going to look like in 5 years' time, when somebody else is in power or someone else is in the driving seat at DP and starts to meddle again. That's the worry that we have in this country, is government interference.
Jenny Quinn says apparently they've returned all the aircraft because they couldn't pay the debt, so there's no aircraft to take over. Linden, do you have the answer to this question? Does SAA still own or lease aircraft? What is the status?
So the airline has returned the leased aircraft that it had. In other words, the ones that it didn't own but that it was paying a monthly lease fee on, which is about 80% of the fleet, if I'm not mistaken. And it's still got some aircraft that it owns outright. But these are aircraft that the rescue practitioners put on the market at the beginning of the year to try and sell because at the time they were the least fuel efficient, therefore the least cost efficient for the airline to operate. They're aircraft that were very good when they were purchased back in the early 2000s, but the technologies advanced since then, and there are more efficient aircraft that are available and more efficient engines. So there are still some aircraft in the fleet, and those are the ones that Grant referred to that are doing the repatriation flights and that are doing the contracts for transporting food and aid within Africa. But that becomes an issue when the airline, assuming that the rescue practitioners are able to succeed in getting funding and the airline does return to operation. One of the challenges it's going to face is acquiring a fleet. Now, there are a lot of aircraft available in the market, but there are also a lot of people who will have been stung by SAA and by this business rescue process. Don't forget, there are a lot of creditors in the market who are only going to get 7.5 cents for every rand that they're owed. So if the shareholder thinks that SAA is going to suddenly find people bending over backwards to do business with the airline on generous credit terms or big discounts, I think they're going to get a bit of a shock, because I think a lot of people will say, no, comes back to what we were saying a second ago. It's about trust. Thanks, we'll have our cash up front or cash on delivery, and maybe after a few years we'll talk about giving you more generous terms. As it is, there are questions about the plausibility of the assumptions for the business rescue plan. They're talking about the airline, this model that they've proposed, returning to profitability by 2024, with some very strange assumptions that they'll be able to do that with just 61% of all available capacity being taken up, which is difficult enough even in good times, let alone when you're coming out of a crisis like the COVID-19 crisis, with a very tepid market, with a lot of weak confidence or lack of confidence in air travel, and weak economies around the world where people don't have the disposable income anymore to travel, and companies are also reviewing their travel policies. So I think we've got to look at that. The assumptions that were made in the rescue model are based on an industry forecast that was done during April. And at the time, all the economists were talking about a V-shaped or a U-shaped recovery. Now they're talking about an L-shaped recovery, where we kind of bump along the bottom for a while and gradually start to pick up. And I think, one needs to go back and interrogate this rescue plan and say, is it actually feasible? A lot of talk about needing 10.5 billion rand now, but people are forgetting that only covers the short-term stuff. That only covers the working capital to keep the lights on and the voluntary retrenchment packages. What about keeping the company going for the next 4 years and possibly longer if the market takes longer to recover than the rescue practitioners originally thought? Mm-hmm. So these are things that are not provided for really in when government talks about the funding that's needed. And if you talk to transport economists, they'll tell you that actually what's the quantum of what's required is probably close to 42 billion rand. Of course, it's not helped every time the rand devalues. And there are some things in SAA's favor. The fuel price, the oil price is low at the moment, but that's going to change as economies recover and rebound and demand picks up for manufacturing and consumption. So there are a lot of open questions and that have to be asked. And I think just to kind of close the circuit here, what Wayne was alluding to a second ago is that airlines are forces for good, generally speaking. There are as many, and I'm quite agnostic when it comes to ownership, there are as many failed privately owned airlines as there are profitable state-owned airlines, and vice versa. It's not the ownership that's the issue. It's the mandate, the capitalization, and as Grant says, the skills and the ability to go off and do the business. If we look at what the air transport sector contributes, the value of the sector for the South African
We just lost you for a second, Linden, but I think we got the point. Sorry, we lost that last bit. We'll come back to you in just a moment. I want to put a question or a couple of comments and questions that have come through from our viewers speaking about safety at the airline. Grant, when I think of air travel, I think of efficiency, I think of cost, and then most importantly for me, the safety of the aircraft that I'm flying in. If SAA was funded tomorrow and back in business by the weekend, what is the status of the safety at SAA?
Well, I can tell you categorically from a pilot's perspective, safety is never a compromise. It's something we're extremely serious about, as you can well imagine. And I can categorically say that SAA from a flight operations side is a safe airline. And from the SAA technical side, I know they did have challenges as far as losing a lot of skilled labor was concerned, but that was raised, and I know that there were certain initiatives that were brought online to address those issues. I think what's happened, though, in the last kind of post-COVID SAA is that we've lost a lot of skills over the years, especially from a management perspective. We are looking at the new structures that have been proposed, and we have had and made a lot of criticism on those structures and whether they actually comply with the CAA regulations. So was SAA safe pre-COVID-19? Categorically. How it's going to pan out in the new SAA version 2.0 with new money, I think as far as us as a union is concerned, we will not allow there to be any compromises. However, we do and we have expressed concern about the current level of management. It hasn't changed. We've actually lost more skills now with the latest voluntary severance packages. The DPE has made it consistently said that they were going to appoint a board with aviation expertise. They're going to bring in CEO. They were going to bring in new management. We've seen nothing. And I mean, any investor, and you asked this question earlier, who's going to invest in SAA? Well, currently, I can't imagine anyone would. The only person that's going to invest in SAA right now is going to be the government. Until such time as any investor sees, A, who is the board? What is the board doing? Who's on the CEO? Who's the CEO? The COO? Where's the aviation expertise? I mean, this company is in desperate need of skill, whether it's locally sourced or sourced abroad. And this has been raised by the DPE and the shareholder. But we have seen nothing. It's just consistently pie in the sky narrative. Show us the money, show us the leadership that we so desperately need. And our biggest concern and frustration is that we have brought numerous plans, whether it's on the organizational design, whether it's in the proper structure, we think will be the safest option for the airline. And often, in fact, not often, always, since December, not once has that ever been taken on board and assimilated into the business rescue plan. And we have got, we've got 617 pilots in our union. We've got doctors. We've got guys with MBAs. We've got guys who've been in the industry for 20, 30 years. We've got test pilots. We've got all this level of expertise. And yet we're seen as the pilots. And as you know, Duvenage, Wayne, what did she say when she stood up in Parliament? The number one problem at SAA are the pilots. Well, we're not the problem here. We've got a huge amount of expertise which we can bring to the table. And we never, ever get an opportunity, or we get the opportunity, but we never seem to be taken seriously with what we bring to the table. And if you look at and the money that's been wasted since December with the business rescue practitioners, bringing in how many different plans were submitted, was it Bain Consulting or this report or that report, and it was all consistently just fed into the system, given to DPE finally. They would sit there in the meetings that we were having with Labour. We were welcomed, and we were in the beginning of that process to make our contribution. Yet, at the end of the day, nothing we put on the table was assimilated into the plan. And DPE, with no aviation expertise at all. In fact, in my opinion, if you look at their track record as far as business is concerned, it's not too impressive. And yet, these are the people that formulated the business rescue plan in conjunction with the business rescue practitioners, who in themselves had no expertise in running an airline. And what have we landed up with? We've landed up with a hybrid plan now, which, as you quite rightly said, and Linden, that how can this plan, work in the long term? I mean, we've certainly got our reservations about, not only the plan, the further amount of money that's going to be required, but also in the organization design of the company. So it's been very frustrating for us because we really felt that, we were willing to do whatever we needed to get this airline back in the sky.
Yeah, I mean, I know all pilots want to do is fly. So it must be very frustrating being on the ground when you want to be up in the air, Grant. Grant, here's a comment that's come in from Tyron Sykes. Tyron says, privatization or annihilation. As long as government has its fingers involved, it's a money pit. Is privatization the answer?
Look, with privatization, the answer, I would say yes, because it would get government out of a controlling share. Or is there partial privatization? Could there be a model in which the government, if they so wish, remains a majority shareholder, but whichever private equity is brought in to run the company or invest in the company would have a controlling share, as opposed to being dictated to by government, which fundamentally I can't imagine anybody would do that anyway. So, I think ultimately we need to be autonomous. We cannot be dictated to by government with government agendas. We're running a business. And let's be honest, airlines run at 2 to 3% margins. I mean, this is not an industry that, can be run with personal agendas or government agendas. It needs to be run as a business. It needs to be run with the best we can get to run the business. Otherwise, in my opinion, you're wasting your time.
Wayne, Karen Allen Granger says we need SAA, or at least freight into Africa as a freight into Africa carrier. What do you think the solution is? Is it privatization? Is it a hybrid mix of government and private equity involved? Where do you see the solution, Wayne? I'm going to put the same question I asked Grant to you.
Yeah, look, we believe that exactly what Grant is saying is that government must get out of the business of business. It doesn't know how to run businesses, and its political agendas get in the way. So if we have a good operation with the good skills and the capitalization, then we have a good airline. But I think when you start getting into its strategy, what do you want? Well, I think what we are seeing now is that the local skies are pretty much being run by private airlines. And they're doing well, especially low-cost airlines, FlySafair. You can see the Kalula's struggling now. They've got their business model wrong, partially, but they'll come back. And there are others that are doing very well. The question is, should SAA be flying locally? Probably not, maybe on 1 or 2 routes. Should they be flying regionally into Africa? Probably not, maybe 1 or 2 routes as well. I think SAA should be strategically aligned to 5 or 6 high-volume routes into the international arena and markets that will feed back into South Africa, and then link up and have the plans that were being put in place, by the way, by management before Duvenage came and interfered, with your code sharing and arrangements and agreements with other airlines to connect up and bring as many passengers as you can come on your own airline to the country, but do so with arrangements and agreements with other airlines. And it's not rocket science, this, by the way. It can be done, as Grant says. And New Zealand is really, it's at the arse end of the world. It's right down, it takes ages to get there. It's at the end of a traffic line, and yet they're profitable. Very similar situation to ours. If they can do it, I can assure you we can do it. We are a hub for Africa. It should be able to be done. The biggest problem is trust and confidence. If you cannot have trust and confidence, which no one has in government, South African government on the Edelman Index Trust Barometer has the lowest trust of all governments measured in its people and its investors. And that's the biggest problem. And that's what Linden's saying. How do you attract investors in? You have to wipe the slate clean, bring them in, make it attractive, and give them the reins. If you can do that, I think we can get SAA back on track. The problem is the public just don't buy that anymore, and we're tired. We've been sold too many promises.
Linden, where does the value in the airline lie? If it is saddled with debt, is it in the international routes? Could you explain that to us, just the value of slots and where the value actually lies? This reminds me of businesses who are licensed by government, for example, and they're saddled with debt. However, investors will still buy into the company. We have examples in the cellular industry, for example, because the license is so valuable, the customer base is so valuable. What is the value, or where does the value lie at SAA?
Okay, so let's just put a couple of things in perspective. The industry, air transport for the South African economy, what does it actually do? Before the COVID crisis, it was supporting 472,000 jobs. And it was those jobs, those are direct jobs as well as jobs in the supply chain and jobs supported by the spending of the wages of people across the supply chain and by the airlines and the aircraft component makers and maintenance shops and things like that. And the sum total was about 3.2% of GDP could be traced back to the enablement of the air transport industry. So it's not something to be trifled with. And SAA, because of the way in which our industry is structured in South Africa, SAA sits at the heart of that. There's a lot of and mutual codependence between airlines, between the airports and the airlines and all of the suppliers. But SAA is not the be-all and end-all of the industry. It's an important cog in the South African industry. So I just want to put that out there. The drivers for the industry are not going to go away. Yes, we're dealing with a crisis right now, and it's probably going to take us 3 or 4 years to recover back to last year's traffic levels. But the fundamental drivers are that the population in Africa is growing and is going to explode over the next 30 years. We're expecting to add the current population of the equivalent of the current populace of China to the total populace of Africa over the next 30 years. So that's a huge imperative for governments who need to educate, clothe, house, and find willful and gainful employment for all those people. And to do that, they need to start trading, they need to start connecting markets, and that's the role that airlines play. They're the safest, most affordable, reliable, efficient ways of moving goods and people between markets, whether it's for trade, commerce, tourism, whatever it happens to be. So we're going to see growth, and the growth is compound. We're going to see growth of around 3.5% per annum in terms of traffic demand over the next 20 to 30 years. So there is a role to be played, and that's why I think long-term people will look at the airline industry and look at the air transport sector and go, yes, it's something to support. Will they invest necessarily? Maybe not invest as shareholders if we've got the issues with these kind of crazy mandates and political interference and micromanagement. But they may look at investing in some of the support infrastructure and things like that. And we see a lot of investment by China in Africa in the air transport sector. Sometimes I wonder, and I think that our politicians don't recognize it or understand it or appreciate it. It is fundamental to our economy. And the other thing at the moment is that there's all this focus on SAA, but our other air transport infrastructure service providers are busy crying at the moment because they're not getting money either. And they've got huge, big revenue holes that have opened up. I'm talking there of the airports company, the air traffic navigation services, the civil aviation authority, the weather service, all of which play fundamental roles and important roles in this whole air transport sector and as a fundamental enabler of economic development for the country. So that's really, when you want to try and wrap it all up and put an economic perspective on it, that's why this is such a crucial thing to get right. Now, do we need the state to necessarily own the airline? Probably not. We're not in Ethiopia where we've regulated the market to prohibit competition. Here we welcome competition. We're very happy that tourists come to the country and spend their money here. We'd like it if they came on a South African airline, but if they don't, not the end of the world, as long as they come and bring money and spend it in South Africa and helped keep people employed here. But, you know, we have that choice to make. We could go back to 1991 and rewind the clock and close down SAF Air and limit all the choice that you have in the market. But that wouldn't help our economy. So the only way forward is to have a really efficient airline.
Sure. Grant, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see happen next? I mean, what are you planning to do as the chair of the SAA Pilots Association? Are you sitting in limbo, or are you engaging? Are you able to engage with anybody at the moment?
You're on mute.
Grant?
That's going to be the catchphrase for 2020. Your microphone's on mute.
Yeah.
To wave the magic wand, because that was the first part of your question, I would say, you know, get us a strong board. You know, bring in the right management team. Show that you're willing to relinquish control, and then put the money in that's required. You know, rejiggle, rework the plan. It's not easy out there. I mean, this COVID-19 has certainly been a challenge. It's decimated the industry, hands down. I mean, you know, I'm part of the Star Alliance. We have a pilots association, and we often get on Zoom calls and talk about how this has been affecting all the different star carriers around the world. Air Canada, you know, retrenched 50% of their employees. There's the CARES Act in the US, which is still, I think, in effect, but it might not be extended. And there's been an amazing amount of people that have lost their jobs. I mean, 6 months ago, there were 150,000 pilots who were gainfully employed, not today. So the industry has been decimated, and it's not going to pick up. And as Linden said, you know, what's the recovery going to look like? W? Is it going to be a U? Is it going to be an L, as you said? So it's going to be very difficult to get back in there. But we're going to need to have the best of the best to make sure that our management are run properly, our board is run properly with aviation experts. And you know what? As Wayne said, unless there's trust, well, then again, also, it's never going to happen. And right now, there is no trust. What are we doing? You know, we're dealing with, we did deal with the DPE. We had a lot of faith that they were going to see the value in getting the right people involved, listen to what we had to say, and, you know, show that the South African public that they could get this right, you know, and an SOE that could be profitable, that could work. In my opinion, that opportunity has passed. I've seen the minister has become far less involved, it seems, not only in our interaction, but certainly in the press. We're dealing exclusively, it seems, with the DG of the DPE. Unfortunately, our minds do not work in the same direction as how we see this airline should be run going forward. So if I could wave my magic wand, I think I've covered it all. Skills, expertise, the finance that we need, but certainly not to put more taxpayers' money. And bearing in mind, all the employees of SAA, we're also taxpayers, okay? We don't want to see our tax revenue or rands go into a bottomless pit. We want to see SAA work. And if it's not going to be taken seriously and run as a proper entity, as much as I would love to see SAA remain, I cannot sit here and say, you know, do it so that we all keep our jobs. But, you know, I can guarantee you in 4 to 5 years from now, SAA will be back with the singing bowl asking for more money. I think right now, my number one focus is on doing the best I can in the opportunities that I have available with the BRPs, the company, and the DPE to secure the funding, to exit the guys and the employees of SA across the board, pilots, cabin crew, engineers, ground staff, you name it. Amazing people that have committed so many years of their life to this great company, are all sitting at home doing desperate, you know, selling cars and houses and, you know, to try and make ends meet. I think that is my number one priority. It's just to secure their exit. SAA, the new SAA version 2.0, there's talk of 1,000 employees. We put a lot of proposals on the table, Tom, which would maybe possibly make that 2,000 employees, but on a reduced salary. And these, you know, proposals have not been taken seriously at all. We're looking for ways to make the company work, to look at innovation and innovative ways to save jobs. Honestly, from what we've experienced with the company, their agenda and ours do not meet. And it's been very disappointing.
Grant, Karen Allen Granger says, good luck, Grant, and I echo that message. I'm sure many of us do. I'm sure I speak for many, Grant, when I say we care about you guys and wish you well in the future. May all of your efforts be fruitful, and I do hope that we get to chat again in slightly better circumstances. Let's hold thumbs for a better future for the staff at SAA. Thank you for joining us tonight, Grant Back.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Linden Birns, thank you for joining us and bringing your expertise to the table. We look forward to chatting with you again, but thank you for making time for us at the Outer Hour this evening. Thank you, Linden.
I'm very glad to have had the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
And Wayne, closing comments with you. What does Outer plan to do when it comes to SAA? Are you keeping an eye on it, or are there active moves on Outer's part?
Well, absolutely, we keep an eye on it because it is a big SOE that does drain the national coffers. I think our efforts are going to be along the lines of continuing to put pressure on those in authority to hold those people who have decimated this airline to account. We've done it with Duvenage, and thanks to the Pilots Association as a joint initiative, we will continue because she's trying to appeal that. But there are others, the Yaki Krinani, Nancy, and others that are implicated, and they need to be held accountable as well. So there's that element of the work. We want to put the new board under pressure to also do their part, like Eskom is doing in holding past executives to account for their problems. For their participation in the problems that they created. And then it is about this, where to with SAA. Our view is that if we cannot get it up quickly and get these decisions, as Grant and Linden have put forward, to the fore and fast, and as we said, it's not rocket science, then we have to put pressure on governments to let go in a way that has the least pain on jobs in this country and the least pain on business and tourism in this country. And what that looks like, we don't know, but we continue to engage with our experts and our panelists and our advisors in the space. But just going forward, aside from SAA, I think what we need to start doing as a country is start celebrating the wins that we have in the fight against corruption, because we sense that wheel is turning, as I said at the beginning of the show. And there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening in that space. And there's so many good projects and so many good things that the team is doing right now. I can tell you we're also moving into our new offices. We're saving a lot of money because we've embraced remote working. We still have a home in an office, but much smaller on a rotational scale of work. And there's exciting stuff happening. This is not a doom and gloom space at Outer. I can assure you it's highly energized. And as a country, I think we need to seize the opportunities to get ourselves out of a hole that is a lot deeper than it was 6 months ago. But the prosperity and the opportunities are so big. And if we grasp them and do it properly, get the expertise in and get government to work for its people, not for itself, we have an amazing future.
Thank you, Wayne. Always good to see you. Can't wait to see you soon. Wayne Duvenage, CEO of Outer. Thank you, Wayne.